Hey ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Data Platform Virtual Summit 2021. And I hope you had as much fun as I did until now, and I promise this session will not stop having fun. At least I try my very best. My session, Power BI Universe Mapping the Hive, is about using different Azure technologies, extracting metadata from the Power BI environment, your Power BI, our Power BI tenant, and getting information and visualizing this information, this metadata, of course, using Power BI to get an idea what's going on inside our Power BI environment, meaning what's inside the workspaces, how many workspaces are there, how many data sets, and things like that. So, and as this is a pre-recorded session, I will be attending this session live and be trying very, very hard to answer all your questions, all the questions that come up during this presentation. So enjoy. And here we go. So what are the session objectives? Why I consider this important, meaning why I consider mapping the hive or extracting metadata and analyzing or visualizing the metadata, why I consider this important. And of course, it's about the architecture, the components, the Azure technologies that I'm using. And of course, there are at least some demos. So here we go. Before we start, let's say some words about me. Now I'm for 20 plus years, I guess it's almost 25, 26 years, I'm designing analytical solutions using the Microsoft Data Platform. This activity has earned me the Microsoft Data Platform MVP award, and I am also have written a book about DAX together with Phil Seamark, who is now working on the Power BI CAT team. And I'm currently working as a solution architect at Munich Re, the world-leading reinsurance company. So if you want to get in touch, send an email, get in touch on LinkedIn, or follow me on Twitter. So this is about me. Hope you have some fun. What are the session objectives? And before we start this, there will be files available on a public GitHub repository called the Hive. So why is this important? At least why I'm considering this important. Before that, please allow me to introduce you to some facts. The environment that I'm talking about here, but it's mapping the environment, meaning visualizing, extracting the metadata, is not especially useful for, or just useful for large environments. I consider this here. So we have almost 50K workspaces. There are 1,000 on-premise data source connections. Some of these data source connections are hosting large amounts of data. They are just small, tiny data sets, and there are people who have almost 1,500 users who have installed Power BI Desktop, but maybe they are not active right now, just looking what's it, just tried it and maybe asked someone else to do this. And our content, this content in this environment is distributed across 3 Azure regions, meaning there are some capacities that are distributed in different regions. This is for compliance reasons, and we have 15,000 dataset refreshes per day and almost 40K employees in total. And of course, we are planning that everyone is at least using a Power BI report a day. So this is our goal. This is the environment, and as you can imagine, this makes it important that you have an idea. But as I mentioned, knowing what's going on, who is doing what, is not just important for such a large environment. So it's important to still allow Power BI is is famous for its self-service capabilities. You can connect to hundreds of data sources, extract, shape, and model the data, and easily visualize this. So people really love it, love Power BI, and of course they are using it a lot. And sometimes it's also necessary if you have to comply to some regulations, to some laws. It's important that you know who is using what, also in a self-service environment, and it's necessary to govern your data efficiently. But it's also important to show people what data is already available. Let's say if people are using or looking for data that is already visualized in their region, where people are already sourcing data from a specific data source, so that they do not have to visualize the data on their own. And of course, it's also about reduced data duplication, meaning sometimes people just do not know from each other that they are extracting data from the same database or data source. And of course, these are just some reasons, and there are many, many more reasons why it's important to get an idea why it's important to extract the metadata and analyze the metadata that's inside your Power BI tenant. And to just this, let's just say this is just a recap. Okay, as a Power BI workspace, there are data sets, and of course, sorry for that, what's inside a Power BI workspace? Data flows, data sets, reports, dashboards, and people are sourcing or consuming the content that it's in the reports, it's in the dashboards, and people are creating data models inside a workspace. It's not just necessary that there's just one data set inside a workspace. Sometimes there are more data sets inside one workspace, and so this could be the content of a Power BI workspace. But there will be many workspaces, and there is a lot of data available, and people are trying, each one is trying to find the proper data and things like that. And meaning this leads to a lot of duplicated work because people are doing the same work in different departments and things like that. So this will happen because this is what Power BI makes so easily possible. But it's also important that you just don't throw Power BI at your users to become, let's say, data-driven, or let's say just because you have Power BI doesn't mean you have established a successful data culture. So meaning it's important if you are aware what's going on and what data sources are sourced by people and people are connecting the Power BI desktop files to these data source, can help to get or to stay organized. And for this reason, it's also a good idea to extract the metadata and visualize what workspaces are sourcing data from what data source, meaning database. Can this be aligned? Can this be reduced? Because it also means that if it's possible to reduce this, then you reduce the strain that is put by data refresh, let's say, for example, for direct query or just importing data, things like that. So it's also necessary to get how much data is loaded into your Power BI environment. So maybe it's possible that different departments are using the same data just once. So this helps. Mapping the environment helps to stay organized and reduce. Last thing, it's not just about complying to some regulations, it's also about maybe saving money. Yes, so this is mapping the environment helps to stay organized, and so this is why I think this is important. So, and now the architecture, and once again here's this hint that there are the files that I'm using, these PowerShell script files are, once again, the hint that these files are in the GitHub repository. So now to the architecture. I guess this is the reason why you are attending this session. So here we go. Before we start or delve into this architecture, this solution, you have to be aware that this is a fun project of mine. By fun, I mean I work on this project in my spare time because I consider this tremendously important, and not every enterprise is willing or able to use Purview as the data cataloging solution from Microsoft, or Elation, and or just there are many other reasons why this cannot be automated, and but I consider this really important, and I'm not done yet. The REST APIs that I'm using to extract the metadata are the same REST APIs that are used by Purview, by Colibra, and I guess also by Elation. And so everything is there, but I'm not done yet. I am not done yet. So, but nevertheless, metadata will be extracted. JSON documents that are containing this metadata will be stored in the blob store. And the JSON documents, of course, will be read by Power BI Desktop, and the first report page is already done. So, and another word in advance, you will find the PowerShell scripts, as I already mentioned throughout the session before, the PowerShell files, the Power BI template file, and also a SQL statement that creates just a single SQL Server table on the GitHub repository. And next to that, there's also, let's say, a detailed documentation of why I'm using what component or which component, and what does this PowerShell script really does. So be aware, and this is just an introduction into the project, and if you are interested, head over to the repository, download the files, and create your own solution. So the architecture, because this is just a little draft, so the new Power BI REST APIs, admin REST APIs that have been published by Microsoft are allowing using a service principal. A service principal, I come to this, what this exactly is in a bit, is let's say some kind of service account. Maybe you are aware of this. So, and this service principal is basically, or some kind of technical user is basically necessary if we want to automate this. Let's say read the environment each day, each week, each hour maybe, to get all this. So there's a little downside to this, because the REST APIs, the admin REST APIs are working asynchronously, meaning you, let's say you publish a request, and maybe sometime later this request will be executed, evaluated, and a result will be created. And nevertheless, you can't, at least you should not wait for this. For this reason, there are three modules. That one is requesting the list of workspaces, then check the status of the provisioning by the Power BI service, and if a request is finished or has been a result, then of course we want to have this result, and then this JSON document is stored on an Azure Data Lake in a blob storage. And for all this, what is done, what has been requested, what is finished, and things like that, I use the Azure SQL database just to get track what the service is been doing so far. So this is basically the architecture. And if you're not familiar with REST APIs at all, then please consider REST API in the sense of what is this project using for. You consider this REST APIs as some kind of table that you can query and that returns a result. In the sense of it, and this result is a JSON document. Here are the links of all the latest announcements. The first announcement that announced the scanning REST APIs, the enhancement to this REST APIs that now you also get the text expression, mesh up queries, the measures, the columns, all the tables that are inside the data set, and things like that. So this is really, really important if your environment grows and you want to see what is inside the data set. So this means this is not, you are not accessing the data by itself, it's just the metadata. What DAX expression are used, and if you want to provide as the detailed information about your DAX expression, things like that, then this has to be enabled inside the Power BI Service admin. But I come to this, what has to be enabled in the Power BI Service tenant settings, in the admin center of the Power BI Service. I come to this in a bit. And so, and another, let's say the more or less final addition, the announcement is who has access to what artifact, meaning a Power BI report, a data set especially, is also available. And it's not fun because the scanner APIs are now generally available, and I also listed the Power BI, the announcement of the Power BI product team here. So if you're not familiar with REST APIs, it's strange maybe. If you are familiar with the REST APIs but not with the Power BI REST admin APIs, reading these announcements from the product team is a really, really good start. So now the service principal application. So what is a service principal? So maybe this is something that is not familiar to you, or as it has been not familiar to me as I first was confronted with, yes, please, Tom, use the service principal. So basically I wasn't aware what I had to do. And in my imagination, a service principal is just a user that is used to authenticate an application. My Power BI REST API or my PowerShell script can be considered an application. And if I want to use resources from the Power BI service, namely the REST APIs, then this application has to be authenticated itself. And for this authentication, the service principal is used. So in my imagination, a service principal is just a user or a technical service account that is used for authentication to use resources. And if you do this unattended, if you are going to automate your solution, then of course it's necessary that a user can authenticate whenever the application, the script, the function is running. And so if you are also aware that there is this Power BI admin portal, then there are admin API settings and there are developer settings. So there are two settings where the term service principal is mentioned. One is under the developer settings, allow service principal to use Power BI APIs. So Power BI APIs basically can do a lot, can create things, and creating also sometimes means or often means deleting things. And for this reason, maybe it's not a good idea to allow this or service principal in general using all Power BI APIs. What we are using, or what this application is using, are these so-called read-only Power BI admin APIs. And for this reason, I enabled for a subset of the organization. I will show you this in a couple of seconds when I'm going demonstrating this live. And as I already mentioned, enhanced admin API responses with detailed metadata, meaning also just the tables of a data set, just also provides the information about columns, measures, and things like that. And of course, the DAX expressions. So this is something that we have to configure. Who is this we? So this is I am a Power BI service administrator. So this means I can do this, but maybe, and I also can do this creating or registering an enterprise application to get a service principal. I also can do this in my own tenant, but it's likely that you are not allowed to do this by yourself, because it's also about distribution or separation of duties. So maybe you are an admin, Power BI service administrator, but maybe you are not allowed to create or register an app. So maybe then you have to go out there and talk to your Azure administrators. And then finally, after this, and it's also a good idea to to add the enterprise application, this service principal that represents an enterprise application, should be added to a security group. And now here I see that I have an Azure Active Directory security group that is used in the context of PBI. So it's a little bit of a naming convention that here I'm using, and this group contains service principals that are going to read-only admin APIs. So for this reason, the name of my Power BI or of the security group, my Azure Active Directory security group. So now, as I already mentioned, there's also some live demo, and for this reason I end this presentation and go right into my Azure portal. I'm already connected to my Azure portal. The service principal, the enterprise application is created using the Azure Active Directory. And for this reason, I create here an enterprise application. Select new. As you see, I've already created some, and some have been added automatically by the Azure services that I'm using. And for this reason, now I use a valid name, and now I create an application. And as I already created some, I give it the name cert. So this maybe is not a useful name, but just for demonstration, now create. And what here I'm asked what I'm going to do with my app. And basically it depends, of course, it depends on the nature of the app. But here I just want just to integrate with the Azure AD, because I want to give this application, this service principal, the user, permissions to access certain resources. For this reason, it's necessary that it integrates with the Azure AD. and now I create it. Now I'm asked if this application should be used just in my tenant, in only my home, let's say my home tenant, and yes, I consider this should be true, and now I just simply register it. So now I have registered my app. Create application has been successfully created, and now it's called, the application is test DPS 2020 cert. And now I go back to my Azure Active Directory, go to the app registrations, and here is my my app. So just go there, and here are some important information. So this is the ID of this specific object in my Azure Active Directory. This is a display name, so let's say just a useful name, and this is the application client ID. This application client ID can be considered the username of this service principal. So it's a good idea to have this, copy it somewhere, because you have to use it later as a username, put it on a secure place, maybe just directly create a key vault if you are working with a key vault. And this is also the directory tenant ID. This is the ID of my tenant, and we use this also later. So what's missing at the current moment for this service principal is a password, because we could use either a certificate or a secret. Sometimes it's necessary that you use a certificate, or here I'm using just a secret. And this sometimes can be a little bit confusing, because if we create, now we have an object, but it also needs some kind of authentication, and this authentication is done by a secret. Now go to secret. Here we can upload certificates or create a client secret. I'm creating a client secret. Here now I am asked a description for this certificate, because sometimes it's helpful to have a certificate, client secrets, excuse me, a secret, just a friendly name. And what's more important is, how long do you want this secret be valid? This is sometimes a good idea to have it a shorter duration, and then you have to be just renew this secret. This can be mandatory has to be, it depends on the Azure administration and some compliance rules. I always tend to make it 24 months valid, and then out of a sudden, after 2 years, I do not remember why a certain project is not working any longer. So a description, the expiration time frame, and I create ad. And now something, and also this has the ID, and what is the value of this ID, or this what is the password? This password is encrypted here, and this is also valid, or no, not valid, sorry for that. It's mandatory that you store this secret, this value, this password, into a secure place, and do it right now, because later you will not be able to identify what is the proper name. So nevertheless, I created an application called test DPS 2021 cert. So this is my username, and then this also has a password. So next step is going back to my Azure Active Directory. And now I just, because I'm right here, I create a security group just by hitting new group, my Azure Active Directory, section groups, new group. This one is, let's say it's easy. It's a type security. There are different types possible. Security, Microsoft 365. It's always a good idea to create a security ID. Give it a good name. I have some, let's say, some naming conventions. Azure Active Directory, of course, to differentiate it from groups that are created on premises. So this is cloud-born, and its type, it's security, PBI. It's a context, in the application context, it's used Power BI, and then I call it just DPS 2021 cert. So, and you also can provide, oops, I'm sorry for that, provide a proper description. Membership type is assigned, and now I want to add a member. And this member I'm just using for my test DPS 20 cert. Now I'm adding this service principal to this security group. Now I selected it and then hit select. Now I can create this group, and I've already assigned a single member. And now I'm going to my Power BI tenant. Connect. Now it's necessary that I as a Power BI service administrator allow this security or members of this security group being able to use my Power BI, meaning the resources owned or provisioned by Power BI, or yes, provisioned by Power BI service, that this resources, this REST APIs can be used by the members of this security group. So, and here are the admin API settings. Allow service principal to use read-only. Yes, I do. And just typing the name of my, so this is not readable. And here we will find our security group. And now applications or service principals that are trying to use this REST APIs are entitled by the Power, or can authenticate successfully to the REST APIs provided by Power BI service. So this is, sorry, I avoid this and cancel this because this was just for demonstration. And now I'm back to my presentation, and let's recap what we have done so far, because this is not the usual type of thing that you are doing, or if you are a Power BI service administrator, it could be that you are not able to do this. Then you maybe want to have to tell your Azure Active Directory or Azure administrator what you want. So for this reason, I just make a small recap of what we just did. Create an enterprise application, provide a useful name, and make it happen that this application integrates with the Azure AD, because it has to be necessary that it's able to authenticate in the Azure Active Directory. Don't forget to create or use this app registrations, select the app and add a certificate or secret. And then, as I did, you can create a client secret. And here we go, the expiration. And it's necessary that you need this password. As I already mentioned, if you just forgot to copy it right now at this current moment after you have created the secret, you will never get back to it. So then you just have to create a new secret. So that's why I mention it, don't forget the secret. And this authentication using the app is necessary to authenticate. You need the app key, the user password, the application key and the secret. And as I already mentioned, the application key can be considered the user and the secret can be considered the password for that user. So we just create the security group. This is the simple part. It's just here in the Azure Active Directory, groups, new group, create one, add a member to this group, and this one has to be the application name that you just created or the Azure administrator created for you. And then finally you can just create or add this group to this Power BI service settings in the admin portal under admin API settings, allowing this group or members of this group using the Power BI admin APIs. So, and this was maybe the most strangest part, and then a short introduction to the blob store where the JSON documents will be stored. So now the blob store. I'm using a blob store inside an Azure Data Lake Gen 2, meaning a dedicated storage account that is configured for Azure Data Lake Generation 2 or as Azure Data Lake Generation 2. And this is just a place that is very flexible, and in consideration of storage, it's also cheap because I'm creating JSON documents, or the PowerShell scripts are creating JSON documents, and I do not want to store these documents somewhere on premises. For this reason, I decided to use a blob store inside Azure Data Lake Gen 2. And here just are some the storage name. A container is configured inside data storage container is configured inside this Azure Data Lake, the storage account. I call this Power BI Workspace Data because this is the place where the JSON documents will be stored. And to access this storage container, I'm using some access keys, connecting either from the PowerShell scripts if the JSON documents will be stored in this blob store, in this folder here, or if I'm using Power BI to extract finally extract the information inside this JSON documents. Azure Data Lake Gen 2, the blob store, both are more or less complex things. If you want to set them up, then please do some reading. In the GitHub repository, I linked some documents from Microsoft where you get familiar with the Azure Data Lake, what's this, and also what is a blob store. So this is just some kind of information, what's necessary. The folder inside the blob store container or data storage container, some access keys, and this is useful if you are accessing this from the PowerShell script for storing and from Power BI desktop for reading. So, and now finally some introduction to the code. And once again, please read or please go to the GitHub repository where there's much more detail about the code. And for this reason, just some basics that have to be kept in mind as I'm using the REST admin APIs. They are asynchronous, meaning I just push some request to an endpoint of this REST API, and I can't wait for the response. At least should not wait, meaning I should not use for loops and always requesting. Waiting is this request has been answered. So some basics. There are 3 steps. Get a list of workspaces. So this is also described in the documentation about this REST API calls that I'm using, or in the blog posts, the announcements from the Power BI team that I mentioned earlier in the presentation. And then I ask for metadata for each single workspace. So one has to be aware that one request can just contain a list of 100 workspaces. So my personal tiny tenant has almost around 70 workspaces, just because I'm more or less creating a workspace for every single report that I'm developing for fun. So, but it could be difficult if there are all 50,000 workspaces. So this means you have to batch this, and I will demonstrate this how I do this in a couple of seconds. This will be the only code lines that I'm presenting, because as I already mentioned, please go to the works repository, and because there's much more documentation about more or less each or single line of the PowerShell scripts. And then finally, if the results are available, then a third PowerShell script will fetch the requests and store the JSON documents inside the blob store. So this is how it is. And as I'm currently working or developing this solution primarily local using Visual Studio Code for the PowerShell scripting, I also create a little tiny JSON document that is also available, a JSON file that stores my secrets, because I do not want to hard code this secrets things for demonstration, and also do not want to use this hard coded stuff, and sooner or later I will replace this requests for user, password, application, tenant IDs, and things like that using Azure Key Vault. And here's an example how I get this. I'm reading locally from this, so this then will be replaced by get the proper secrets and usernames from an Azure Key Vault. Here I'm using my local JSON file and convert it, and then basically this repeats through all the 3 scripts. I'm using the app ID, the sequence, the tenant, and then finally I'm using this connecting to the Power BI service as a service principal. This is a little bit of this is, let's say, a flag how you want to connect to the Power BI service, and I'm connecting as a service principal. So if you are diving into the scripts, if you downloaded it and try to or using them, I assume that you have some kind of PowerShell experience, and so that you are a little bit familiar with PowerShell scripting. So, and before we start with the final and maybe the most expected part of this presentation, I just want to demonstrate you another tool. Maybe you are already familiar with this tool. This tool is called the Azure Storage Explorer, that allows to connect to your Azure Data Lake, and here to my blob containers, and here my Power BI workspace data. And there are currently 5 JSON documents because I batched my even if I just don't have 100, I batched my request just to get familiar with this requests and batching size. So this is the reason why I have 5 JSON documents, and I also can download one and then look at a JSON document, but I will omit this. And also, before we start with Power BI, there's also some kind of Power BI Visual Studio Code that I want to share with you. So let me present the PowerShell script that does the reading, gets a list of the workspaces, and I'm just importing some modules, read my local file that stores the connection settings, the username, and things like that. Here I get these information that I need to connect as a Power BI service principal. Then, because I'm also using a SQL to store what I requested, what are the requests ID, and then the next step will be, have these requests been successfully completed by the Power BI service. Then I need this request ID to ask what is the status of this request IDs. For this reason, I store this requests IDs and the results into a SQL Server database. And finally, a little bit of math, and this is the batch size. So I batched my workspaces. Just say here would basically here would be just 100 because because my tenant has just 77 or 78 or 80 workspaces, I batched it, and this is the reason why I got 5 JSON documents. And then finally a little bit about the for loop, requesting the batches, creating the batches, omitting or pushing the batches to each batch, to calling the get workspace info request Power BI REST method, and with my JSON doc as parameter. And finally, this is more or less, this is the first script. It's not that much. For this reason, I consider it, let's say, an easy script. You have to be aware that this is, as I mentioned, this is work in progress. For this reason, you will not find, at least not now, any try error things like that to be more robust. I just wanted to have from the start, meaning requesting to the first bar chart, I just want to have a final solution, and then I will flesh it out in the upcoming days, months, years maybe. And for this reason, going back to my Power BI presentation, and finally coming to Power BI and wondering what's possible. So So now let's come to the fun part, meaning analyzing, visualizing the data that we have extracted using the REST APIs, stored the JSON documents on a blob store and Azure Data Lake. So now the fun part, as I mentioned, and for this reason we open Power BI Desktop, and the Git repository also contains a Power BI template file. You can go to this by open file, import Power BI template. And as this is a template file and I use parameters for the connection strings, you will see this dialog here in a couple of seconds, the storage account. One of the parameters you need for connecting with the blob store and also the blob folder, meaning the name of the container, and connect. And in a couple of seconds, we will get asked to provide the account key. This is to authenticate with or against the storage account. And here we go. I copied it and connected. And here we go. So loading just 5 files. So my tiny Power BI file. And what's going on? Where is it? There it is. There it comes. So this is just one page. You have to be aware that as is pre-recorded, it's likely that when you open the template file, connect to the blob store, that it contains a little bit more pages than just this one. And for this reason, I just go directly to the Power Query, just what's going on here. So this one contains this. There's one query. This contains or reads all the storage container. Here, this is the Power BI workspace data. We navigate to this, and then we filter the rows. There's not that much fit to filter, at least not now. And as we can see here, there are attributes, records, and things like that. And this is how these information is organized. Let's say from a JSON point of view, it's nested JSON documents. And so this is a list in a list. And I rename this a little bit just for clarity. And then I come from my first, let's say, useful query, and this is the workspaces one, and workspace name, workspace type, it's a workspace. Of course it's a workspace. It could also be a group or a personal one, as you may know it. It's active or deleted and things like that. All the information that is contained in these, and also this also contains the name of the reports, dashboards, datasets, data flows that are contained in this workspace. And sooner or later, there's a complete data model. But at least now, this is the information just for now. So back to the presentation. Hope you enjoyed this little... Oh, I just want to at least show what can be seen. Now I have 69, not 80, 69 workspaces. 55 are active, the other one are deleted, 14. I have 17 workspaces on a premium, personal, so from works, this indicates this one here, 23 groups. I still have workspaces that are not V2, not in the new workspace experience. So now back to the presentation, final minutes. Just a reminder, storage account, the blob folder, the account key, because we are using a template file. And as I mentioned, as this is pre-recorded, if you will download it, there are much more pages and more things related, or a data model is more complete. Recap. So analyzing metadata, as far as from my point of view, is really important. You can get tremendous insight. It's about saving money, be compliant, and some things are maybe unfamiliar, like security groups or user service principles. Security groups, if your environment is growing, then you will come more used to security groups, because they can also use as group in row level security, makes life of an admin much more simple. Azure Blob Store is a cheap and very, very flexible storage system. PowerShell helps us, the Power BI service administrators, a lot, answering many questions, or automate simple tasks like creating a workspace on request, for example, using a Power App. So, this is my session. Thanks, Microsoft. Thanks the Data AI Summit team, the Data Platform Virtual Summit team, and you can win prizes if you post a selfie with a hashtag, give session and conference feedback, and visit our sponsors and exhibitor sites. Please have a great day. Enjoy the session. Thanks for joining my talk about Power BI mapping the hive. Have a great day. Bye.